could turn the fan off. It is making the weirdest flickering on your picture.
On mine?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, it's just, I think everybody will appreciate that. Just the other day, somebody had helicopter head, and their head was right smack in the center of a fan. Yeah, that's going to be better. I think most people would rather not have that flickering. Yeah, we got about 4 minutes, and then we can get started. We may get 4 chats. Let's look at those. Ah, good. When that fan stops spinning, that'll be really good. I think other people appreciate that too, not to be watching that.
Well, thank you for letting me know. Those are new things to consider.
Well, that's the kind of, there's people that have a certain kind of visual processing problem where something like that fan going around just drive them nuts. It kind of, because that makes everything even more to seem like a discotheque.
For all those of you who are waiting patiently, we're just going to give it just a couple more minutes, and
Not
then we'll
time yet. You got to wait for people to log on.
We will. So there's already over 100 people in attendance.
Wonderful.
So. Well, good morning, everybody. We're really glad that you were all able to join us. And Missouri Rehabilitation Association is really proud to be able to have Dr. Temple Grandin with us this morning. Just a few things to point out. We do have closed caption available, so you might want to check the chat box. There is a link that was posted there if that makes it easiest for you. And we're going to have CRC CEUs available. If you'd send me an email after the presentation, I will work on getting those out over the next week. And we'll also work on getting a link to the recording and a transcript from the closed captioning. We'll work on getting that out too over the next week as well. So we've got some questions already that have been emailed in prior to today's presentation. And if you have questions you'd like to ask Dr. Grandin, we'd like for you to put those in the chat box. And Jennifer Kincaid, which is our new MRA president, she's agreed to go ahead and watch the chat box so we can ask your questions that are of importance to you. Dr. Grandin is a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. Temple's achievements are remarkable because she was an autistic child. At 2, she had no speech and all the signs of severe autism. Many hours of speech therapy and intensive teaching enabled her to learn speech. As a teenager, life was hard with constant teasing. The mentoring she received by her high school science teacher and her aunt on the ranch in Arizona motivated Temple to study and pursue a career as a scientist and livestock equipment designer. Her impressive professional background speaks volumes on her distinguished career and involves improving the handling and welfare of farm animals. 50% of the cattle in the United States and Canada are handled in equipment she designed for meat plants. Other professional activities include developing animal welfare guidelines for the meat industry and consulting with companies on animal welfare. Dr. Grandin is also an author, including her book, Animals in Translation, which is a New York Times bestseller. In 2016, Temple was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. We'd like to welcome you, Dr. Grandin. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to talking to everybody. And when I was a little kid, I had all the full-blown symptoms of autism, and I went into a field where I could use my abilities in visual thinking. One of my favorite things to talk about is the different kinds of minds. I'm an object visualizer, so that made me very good at designing things, good at art. A lot of people who are in skilled trades are visual thinkers. One of the worst things that schools have done is taking out skilled trades. Then you've got your more mathematical minds, and then you've got the word thinkers who are good at word things. So when you're trying to figure out what jobs people should go into, try to figure out, what kind of, where their aptitudes are. In fact, I talk about this in my book, The Autistic Brain. And in the autistic brain, I have science that shows that these different thinking styles actually do exist. I worked with every major meat company on installing equipment. And I'm going to estimate that about 20% of the people that I worked with, welders, equipment designers, and drafting people, were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. And they were brilliant. They built the stuff. And what I'm seeing today, since they've taken skilled trades out of the schools, the kids didn't get a chance to even get exposed to this stuff to find out if they'd be good at it. Okay, let's look at some of the questions. Okay, Aaron, do you have a question?
Hi, it's nice to meet you. I've heard a lot of good things about you.
Okay, well, thank you.
Welcome. I'm on the spectrum, and school is really tough for me with reading and everything, and also talking to people my age. I was wondering if you how have you handled talking to people and getting to know people?
Well, usually I get friends who shared interests. My friends when I was in high school were in horseback riding, model rockets, and electronics. Now it might be a robotics class or music or art or computer programming, something where there's a shared interest. So what are you good at doing?
I like fantasy football. I'm really good with stats and memorizing.
All right, stats. Let's take something that can turn into a career. This is a career seminar. Okay, statistics is math. Have you ever taken any computer programming? Maybe you'd be good at that. Silicon Valley's hiring right now. They got a shortage of programmers. Maybe you need to be taking some JavaScript or some Python, something like that, and learn some computer programming. And there's a lot of classes online. You can go on Khan Academy. There's code.org.
Yeah,
What you
I'm
need to
not.
do
Yeah, I'm
when
not too good at math, but
oh, you're
maybe
not
like
too good at math.
maybe
What
like
is your best, what's your best thing that you're good at?
Memorization, kind of. I want to maybe be a broadcaster for sports.
All right, okay. Well, and that's something where you're going to just start out broadcasting maybe the high school football game. Unfortunately, now I saw the
Okay.
saddest thing just the other day. I went to a restaurant and they had a TV outside because I won't eat inside a restaurant. I'm too worried about getting COVID. But they had a TV outside and they were playing the Broncos game and there was the seats were all empty and somebody had put applause of the fans sound effects into the game. I think they must have been doing a 15-second delay and then laying in that soundtrack because it sounded like a normal game. Now, how realistic it was, I didn't watch it long enough, but it was just so sad to see all the seats empty. But, you know, sports broadcasting is something that you start out with a high school football game and gradually, you know, you might get a job in a radio station just doing some little tech thing, some little tiny radio station, and you work your way up in that field.
Right. I think writing is, I'm kind of good at writing too. I've actually made my own website and I'm trying to start a business with
What kind of
consulting.
business are you trying to start?
Like consulting, if
Of
people
what?
have advice about fantasy football or the NFL in general. I know like all the players. I can name all 32 teams
All right,
and
so
like
you're
all the starters on all the teams. Yeah, just off the top of
well,
my
you
head.
have to have something where you get, you know, paid, you know, to make a business out of it. Where there's where you get enough traffic on your site that you can put advertising on it. You build up if you make a really great fantasy football site and it becomes the place to go to, then you can run advertising on it and you can make a living off the ads.
And I think
Yeah.
that's a great, some good information to give to start at entry level, and we'll keep the discussion focused on employment today. I do have a question that was asked by one of the Missouri VR folks. They said that you mentioned something about a portfolio
Oh,
in the
yes.
course of your career when seeking employment. So could you tell us a little bit about the portfolio?
Oh, interview for me. I'd take the drawings, I'd spread the drawings out, show them. This is my book, Thinking in Pictures. I'll show you some of the stuff I put in the portfolio. The first thing I did is I simply showed them my work. I showed them what I could do. Here are some of my drawings that are in Thinking in Pictures. Okay, if I got them nice and clear, can you see them good? Those are some of my drawings. And most of my stuff was pre-internet. So I would just unfold a great big huge drawing, lay it on the desk. And then I put pictures of jobs, things I had designed, articles I had done in the meat industry trade magazines. I just showed off my work. Okay, let's say somebody rebuilt an engine. Well, I'd show it all, picture all crappy and dirty, and then I'd show it partially rebuilt, and here's an engine I rebuilt for a car. Or whatever the thing is. Maybe they were a programmer. Well, then I'd show some of the code I wrote. What you want in a portfolio is a 30-second wow. And this is how I sold Cargill. I sent Mr. Fielding, the head of Cargill, this would have been back in the late 80s, a portfolio. And all it had in it was a big fold-out drawing. In fact, a drawing very similar to what I just showed you. 2 plastic pages of pictures, a really nice professional brochure, 2 trade journal articles, and a cover letter. So they could just look at it, wow. You don't want to give somebody a binder full of junk like that. You want something that someone can look at very quickly and they go, wow, this person has the ability. And then I learned that I put 1 set of drawings in for a meat plant. I use another set for a feedlot and another set for a ranch. And the brochure covered everything. But then the other stuff, I'd target the audience. And there's all kinds of things you can make a portfolio. Dressmaking, cooking, things you've cooked, you can put in a portfolio. In other words, what I learned was to show my work, not my nerdy, goofy self. I let the work do the selling. 30-second wow. And it needs to be neatly presented. I made the mistake of letting my portfolio get kind of worn, the paper and stuff. The website, it needs to be professional. Don't put some goofy thing on a website. One of the big mistakes everybody makes, you got a purple background with yellow type. Please don't do that kind of stuff. Nobody wants to read that. Just really professional, showing off your work. 30-second wow. My interview, within the first minute of the interview, I had the drawings on the table. That's how I sold it.
That's good advice. You had mentioned computer tech jobs are a good fit for those with autism.
Not everybody with autism. This is where you get into different kinds of minds. They're good for my kind of mind. I can't do computer programming. I tried it. I'm back from the Fortran days. Punch cards, imagine airline boarding passes going through a machine. It's a mechanical spreadsheet. But I wasn't able to do the computer programming. I'm what's called an object visualizer. So the things I was good at was my design work. There's two parts of engineering. There's industrial design, which is the art side of engineering. And then there's the more mathematical engineering side. And so I would be very good at skilled trades. I've worked with a lot of object visualizers that built some of my things. They're very good at welding. One of the worst things that schools have done is taking out the skilled trades. Worst thing they've ever done. Cooking, sewing, woodworking, auto shop, metal shop. Worst thing they've ever done. Then the mathematical minds, they're going to go to traditional engineering with a lot of math, also computer programming. And then you get the word thinkers. Okay, like Aaron with the football fantasy thing, knows all the players. Another field that someone like Aaron could be really, really good at is specialized retail. There have been 3 cases where teenagers that couldn't drive walked into a dealership owned by the family or next door neighbor and just started selling cars because they had such good knowledge of the vehicles. They couldn't demo them. They were allowed to demo in park only. And then somebody else had to go out, and they did the drive. But they just, boom, walked into car dealerships, started selling cars because they were recognized for their knowledge of cars. So specialized retail. I mean, it could be men's shoes. People aren't buying many shoes today. It could be tools at Home Depot. It could be a lot of different things where you're recognized, sporting equipment. And then you got to learn things like be a little more diplomatic. Let's say you worked for a sporting goods company, and I was up in Canada, so I used a Canadian example. And you called the cheapest hockey stick in there a piece of garbage. And I go, wait a minute. No, that's not the thing to do. You might just say that's a beginner stick. And if you think your kid's going to be really serious, I get a little bit better stick than that. You can say it diplomatically, but that's specialized retail. There was a successful case of a guy with autism who's selling a specialized business insurance, something where you have knowledge in a highly specialized area and you're appreciated for that knowledge.
Well, those are good points to take and keep in mind. As professionals who are focused on reducing and eliminating barriers to the labor market for people with disabilities, what advice would you give us to allow us to expand our ability to be successful in supporting the people we serve?
I think one of the biggest mistakes is lumping all the disabilities together. You see, this is where I'm a visual thinker. So a person using a wheelchair, I see that person, and a person that's blind, and a person that has autism or dyslexia. They're all very different in what they can do. Okay, in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the waist down, if it's in an office, whatever their aptitude is, they can do it. Now you have to see what kind of thinker they are. That's the way I look at a wheelchair. It's not, there's going to be certain work they can't do, but if it's in an office, and most are accessible now, they can do it. So I'm going to just go, okay, now where's his aptitudes? What could this person be good at? But there's a tendency to totally overgeneralize about this. And I've been seeing this tendency all the time. You see, for me, it's specific. I tend to think in specific examples. I have a telephone answering service, an old-fashioned answering service. I still have it. And the guy who runs that had a wheelchair. I didn't know that for something like 20 years until it broke one day. And he says, I called up their number that still worked. And he says, I can't roll over the cables. That's when I found out that he was in a wheelchair. He owns this business. You know, that's an example of a success story of somebody that's using a wheelchair. You see, so I think specific examples. And he has his own business. And it's, you know, and there's still a need for those kind of answering services even now. So that's successful. I would simply ask a guy in a wheelchair, I'm going to just, okay, we're pretty well limited to the office environment. All right, what can you do? Got computer skills, math skills, programming skills? What kind of stuff can you do?
And Missouri does stress the importance of having individualized plans for employment. So we definitely can relate to what you're sharing with us right now. What do employers need to know about folks on the autism spectrum?
Okay, first of all, vague instructions do not work. Another problem with people on the autism spectrum, but a lot of people with learning differences, is multitasking. They're not going to be able to do jobs with multitasking, like maybe McDonald's takeout window might be a really bad choice. The other thing they have problems with, and employers getting angry about this, is I already showed him how to clean the ice cream machine at McDonald's 5 times. Why can't he do it? Okay, this is another working memory problem. They cannot remember long strings of verbal information. You need to give them a checklist, give them a pilot's checklist. Tear down steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, some keywords, cleaning steps, and then reassembly steps. You give them a little pilot's checklist, just like what a pilot has, you know, for an airplane. And because I cannot remember long strings of verbal instructions, I cannot remember it. I have to write it down. And that's a problem even now I have. So that's something, clear instructions. Also, if they make a social mistake at work, they need to be pulled into the office, quietly told, well, you can't call your colleagues stupid at a project meeting. In my very first project, I criticized some welding, and I said it looked like bird doo-doo, and pigeons had doo-dooed on it. So Harley, the plant engineer, pulled me into his office and explained to me quietly in private, you just have to be really direct, that I had to apologize for that rude talk. And he also explained to me that the welder worked for him, and if I didn't like the welding, I should have come to him. And he explained the chain of command, done quietly. There's a scene in the movie where the boss says, you stink, use the deodorant. That scene happened. You know, people need to clean it up. This has been a problem with some people on the autism spectrum. You cannot be a rude, filthy slob. You've got to clean that up. And I thank that boss now. But there's other things where you just have to pull them in private and explain what they did wrong and tell them what they should do. And some people are going to need a quiet place to work. Okay, now we're probably going to be socially distanced for a while. That's going to be good for some of the people on the spectrum. But clear instructions about what the task is, what's expected. You can't say vague. Let's say somebody worked for a computer company. They can't say develop new software. That's too vague. You give them some specific homework. Like right now, I'm working with Betsy, my wonderful, wonderful co-writer on a new book on visual thinking. And she's totally verbal. And I said, Betsy, I want homework. Specific stuff you want me to look up and chunks to write. Can't be vague. And I've done that on other projects where I wrote some animal welfare guidelines with a veterinary organization. And I said, I want homework. Okay, I'm willing to do this section, this length, this way of doing the references, and get it done 30 days from now. Specific.
Kathy, I think we have a question in the chat box. Would you like me to go ahead?
Yeah, wait a minute, I'm just looking at
Yes, thank you.
specialization playing musical instruments. Well, musical instrument portfolio, you're going to have to play it. And make sure you play it on something that's going to have good fidelity. So it's going to sound nice. You have to play the portfolio. And then you get a demo videos up on YouTube. You know, let's say our thing is dance. then you want to come in with an iPad or some kind of tablet. Don't have a junky cover on it. Don't have political garbage on the cover. Get rid of the junky cover and make sure it's charged. Again, presentation. And that would be a portfolio. There's been an interesting thing with, I was reading the Malcolm Gladwell book, and they were reading about auditions for concert musicians. And when they put them behind a screen, the ladies and the men came out the same. When the screen wasn't there, the ladies got fewer jobs. There's really awful research on the resume stuff. It's just atrocious. You know, you make names that look like different nationalities and with the same resume, and you send them out and you're getting different responses. It's not right. The studies really show some problems with discrimination. No, you show the music portfolio off. That's your resume. And then I'd put, you know, I'd put, let's say if you do a variety of things, then I'd put clips of a variety of things on it. And if you do it, you know, some people are really dramatic, how they play the piano or whatever, then it'd be a video that I would show. And now with all the cheap video equipment, phones are very, very good video cameras. These things are not expensive to make anymore. My generation, that kind of stuff cost a fortune.
How do you think employers can be most helpful and accommodating in the workplace?
Well, it depends upon the thing.
autism?
Okay, if you're in a wheelchair, you're going to have an accessible building. Okay, that's straightforward. I just explained on the autistic, clear instructions about what's expected. Okay, let's say I've got to do that McDonald's ice cream machine. I've got to make myself a pilot's checklist. And a lot of employers get really frustrated. So, well, I already showed him how to do that machine 5 times. What's wrong with him? Is he stupid? Well, you got to give him a chance to make that pilot's checklist. Because if I was a computer, I have no working memory. I have tons of long-term memory. So you can look up the Intel 286. You can look that up. That's kind of working memory I've got. And I'd work on it more of a bottom-up approach. One successful placement at a time, really successful, and then write about it. I used to write about my projects. You know, and I tell about how to make the stuff. The other thing I'm seeing with a lot of vocational rehabilitation is that, again, too much overgeneralization about autism. Okay, for one client, a job at a grocery store, stocking shelves, is the perfect stepping stone to something bigger. For another client, maybe with more intellectual disability, it's a suitable career. I am finding that people are not making the differentiation between where the job at the grocery store is a stepping stone versus to where it is a suitable career. I'm seeing that problem all the time. That somebody that ought to be programming computers should not be stocking grocery shelves for the rest of his life. But that job's great for teaching work skills.
And at Voc Rehab, I think most of the counselors in Missouri, we are given information and guidance to have these conversations with our folks with disabilities and see what area they would like to go into. Sometimes folks return back to Voc Rehab after they try the work world for a little bit, and then they come back because they're ready to do some college training or job training.
Yeah, and that's good. And we also, the other big problem we need to be working on is you get a kid with an autism diagnosis. The problem with autism is it goes from a Silicon Valley programmer, I've been to Silicon Valley, half those programmers are on the spectrum, to somebody who can't dress themselves. And you got the same name for this? This doesn't make very much sense. Kids are not learning enough work skills today, because I am seeing grandfathers coming up to me all the time that find out they're on the autism spectrum when the kids get diagnosed. And granddaddy had a paper route at age 11, and he's an engineer or an accountant or some other decent job he's been in his whole life. So he learned how to work at a really, really young age.
And I do have one question in line with that. Somebody had sent an inquiry. They have a family member with autism. The parents have kept them home with little social interaction. what advice do you have to start a conversation with the parents on the importance of the interaction and intervention? And that's in line with what you just talked about.
Well, I come out of the construction industry. I come out of the meat industry. I come out of kind of a tough industry. So I'm going to give you the job trailer version without the swear words. And parents come up to me and I say, you need to get your kid out of the basement off the video games and needs to get doing something else. So what do we do with the video game addicts? They're usually the visual thinkers like me. There's been 3 wonderful successes with introducing them to fixing cars. And then they discovered that that was more interesting than video games were. But there's other kids, we need to just get them off their duff. I'm seeing smart kids that are honor students that are labeled autistic and they've never gone shopping by themselves. This is completely ridiculous. I'm talking teenagers, fully verbal teenagers. That's completely ridiculous. I mean, they haven't done things that I was doing when I was 8 years old. And I've seen some parents that get kind of really hung up in where I think in the whole special needs thing, and they just can't seem to let go. I had talked to one mom, her 16-year-old honor student had never gone shopping. And when I suggested he go in the store and buy something, she broke down and says, I can't let go. Yes, let go to buy printer paper.
And
That was the thing that I suggested that he buy. And I said, printer paper, I want you to think about it. Pretty innocent thing. Yes, he needs to learn how to buy that.
Thank you for sharing that. Sometimes we find that the things our clients fixate on makes it hard for them to build relationships with their coworkers. What has worked well for you that helped with fixations?
Well, I had to learn, I had to make some rules that some of my fixations, I could only tell that same story twice. I can get off on world's worst vomit flights. All right, and I've been on them. We can get laughing about world's worst vomit flights, but you might talk about that twice and then find other things. Sports is really safe. You can talk about what a team did. Pets is safe. Let's keep sex, religion, and politics away from work. Let's park that out in the parking lot or park it at home. Sports, you can talk about movies as long as they're not controversial ones, but sports and pets are always safe. Hobbies are another thing, and then you might get some friends that are dog enthusiasts. These are the kind of things to get friends, and you just can't keep going on and on about your favorite stuff. And this is where someone's got to pull them aside and said that your coworkers don't want to hear about the same thing over and over and over again. You just have to train them not to do that. Okay, you got a grandson that was on the spectrum, he's in the Marines, good. Now this brings up another thing with the military, and that's disclosure. Don't. I've seen some very bad cases of discrimination. And this brings up the whole thing of when you disclose. I just talked to a person in the early 30s. This is within the last year, and he'd had a job for 5 years, kind of an outdoor technical thing. Since it's so recent, I can't tell you what he did. I can't identify him, but an outdoor technical thing. We'll just call it that. Been in that job for 5 years. He disclosed he was autism, and they ended up letting him go. That was last week I talked to them. There's still a lot of discrimination. So, when I was doing all my stuff, I never disclosed. No, I'd say I'm terrible at multitasking, some very specific thing. Or I need to make a pilot's checklist. Or I need homework, specific assignments. I've done that in meetings. When I was writing stuff that I had to do. I like homework. I want to write down what my specific assignment for this document, and there's a document with like 20 authors on it. I'm going to write this one piece of it. But this is the tricky thing of when to disclose. There's unfortunately too much discrimination out there still. Now, obviously, if somebody in a wheelchair, obviously you disclose that. But
That's really good to keep in mind. I think right above that, we had another question. It just scrolled as I was about to read it. What's the best approach for people with autism dealing with management that may not understand their diagnosis?
Well, let's get more specific on where the problem is. You see, the verbal thinker tends to say, "Oh, this guy just isn't very social." You see, when I went at my very first internship job, the plant engineer pulled me into his office. He was a perfect job coach. When I criticized the welding, I said it looked like pigeon doo-doo, and he pulled me into the office and explained I had to apologize. I didn't have to tell Whitey the welder I thought his welding was wonderful, but I had to apologize for the rude language. He told me what I should do, calmly and quietly. He was the perfect job coach, an older engineer, probably late 50s. And he did exactly the right thing. And a lot of people on the spectrum need a quiet place to work. Some of these open office plans, oh, there's no way I could have done that. Okay, now here's somebody where the recruiter said, if you weren't on medication. See, this is where it varies, but I've heard some bad stuff with the military and with pilot training. Another bad case I ran into is a guy that is FFA physical and said he was on the autism spectrum, and well, they flunked his physical. That was about 5 years ago. These are cases that so it's a tricky thing on when to disclose. But lots of times you can just say, disclose the thing you're bad at. I'm a little socially awkward, or I'm terrible at multitasking, or I need to make a pilot's checklist for this task. Okay, now here's something. This is a good thing. Tom Hudson, he's saying strategies to connive people with autism and their parents take the risk of getting a job. I can tell you, I spent 25 years on heavy construction sites. I've worked for every major meat company, and I'll give you the job trailer version without the swear words. I just tell these parents, you gotta get this kid out of the house. You gotta do some stuff. Now, what you have to do is you have to stretch them, give them some choices. Always a choice. When I was 15, I had the chance to go to my aunt's ranch. And if I hadn't gone to my aunt's ranch, I would not have been in the cattle industry. And the other thing is learning driving. And if I hadn't learned to drive, I wouldn't be in the cattle industry. It's going to take longer. Let me tell you how to deal with the multitasking. I did 200 miles on dirt roads before I touched traffic. So that learning how to operate the car was on muscle memory, on autopilot. No, well, long time. Big fields, big parking lots, deserted office parks. Nobody's there now. That's a good place to practice. Practice, practice, practice in totally safe places. Just going to take longer. But I would not have had a good career if I hadn't learned to drive. And driver's ed shoves them in way too quickly. I'm going to do all this practice before I even start driver's ed, other than the classroom part. You can start the classroom part right away, but the actual car driving, they push them into it too quickly. You know, because the working memory in engineering, it's called a workaround. Well, that's what I did. I'm glad that my aunt's mailbox is 3 miles away, so that every day I got 6 miles of driving on a dirt road. Didn't take very long to rack up that 200 miles. Then carefully do the traffic. No, but there's a point. Often we will get a pat rejection from a job idea. Well, I started out a business kind of freelance, one project at a time. And I was just talking to another student just the other day. She was in the restaurant industry, which of course is ruined by COVID. Just before I came in, I was reading about the vaccines, and they think that some of them will only be like half effective. And so the restaurant industry is going to be a mess. So she's trying to figure out something else to do. And she loves to take yoga. So we talked about how to pick out a yoga school. I said, it doesn't have to be the best, but I want to make sure it's one that's reputable. They're not going to be teaching you that yoga cures cancer. And also I said to her, you want a school that's going to teach you enough anatomy so that you never hurt a client getting them to do a yoga pose. And you could just, you don't want to go rent a studio. You're going to go broke. Why don't you just start, doing kind of private classes, little business. Hairdressing, oh, that's a racket. You got to lease a chair in a salon. Well, you don't make any money doing that. That's not a business I'm really because you have to have fancy equipment to do that job. Nail salons are the same way. But the yoga is something that doesn't require much equipment. So we were discussing how for her to start a business doing that. Okay, skilled trades. I mean, basically, I took woodworking in 5th grade. I was taking sewing in 4th grade. We need to be getting the hands-on stuff back into the schools. It's one of the worst things that schools ever did, was taking out cooking, sewing, woodworking, metalworking, all of those hands-on things, theater, all things that expose kids to things that can turn into careers. We've got kids growing up today that have never used tools. And we have a gigantic shortage of high-end skilled trades. Welders who can read drawings. No, and I want the welder to take some drafting too, because he's a lot more valuable if he can read, or she can read drawings and build stuff off of drawings. All the welders I worked with, I could hand them a drawing and they could build it. The pipeline welder, yeah, they're certified. That's all I know how to do is weld pipelines. Yeah, you got to get a little more diversified than that. Yep, I know somebody in that field.
I was going to say a lot of the kids watch YouTube, but they're not actually doing any type of hands-on. And it's almost like they're encouraging technology over the actual hands-on type of work. And I agree with you, taking out, you know, woodworking, cooking, just basic skills.
Well, they have these classes like for, you know, linemen, like to fix the electrical wires. They have all this stuff in the community colleges, but the problem is it's almost too late. We've got to hook kids early. We don't have enough people to fix wires. We're getting more and more and more really atrocious storms. Now, how about ice this big on a wire? You know what that does to your main electrical transmission lines? It breaks the towers. Yeah, they had that happen in Canada. We had that happen in Kansas back in 2007. Busted down 4 miles of those towers, bent them in half. We need people that can fix that stuff. But the other problem we've got, since kids are not doing hands-on things, is they're afraid to make a mistake. I mean, I have a book, kids' little project book that I did called Calling All Minds. And I held up a little paper snowflake I had cut out of a piece of printer paper. And I just held it up, and I had an educator ask me, I almost couldn't believe it. This was just recently. Well, what if the kid cuts the snowflake wrong and it falls apart? And isn't it going to hurt his self-esteem? I go, wait a minute. You're talking about a piece of printer paper. You're worrying about a stupid piece of printer paper? You get another piece and you try to do it right. I just couldn't believe it. You're going to hurt his self-esteem because his snowflake fell apart. Then you show him to fold it and cut it so it won't fall apart. Kids are too worried about making a mistake. I'll never forget the sewing project I ruined when I was about 12. It was a pair of pants I was going to make for my mother. I cut the fabric wrong. There was no way to get more fabric. This was all pre-internet. I'd throw the whole project in the garbage. Be more careful next time. That's the lesson. This is where I think that taking this stuff out is completely terrible, because sewing, you can make a career out of that. You can make custom clothes for people. There's a lot of things you can do. And then portfolio is easy to do. You just show pictures of the people wearing the clothes. And make sure you don't have that your background, you got I'll have to have a kind of a weird background. My computer's hardwired, I can't move it. But I make sure I clean up the kitchen. I got the junk off the counter. Then I know I'm doing a conference.
It looks like we have another question in the chat. It looks like Catherine is working with a student who comes off rude to parents, people like his employment specialist, and he has done some exploration with voc rehab that was self-reported, but he declines anything that isn't specifically art. How do I, the VRC, and his employment specialist, I guess, how does Catherine help the student stop yelling at parents and employment specialists?
Well, first of all, this is a boy or a girl?
I'm not sure, Catherine, boy. Okay, Catherine answered, this is a boy.
Well, this kid needs to have a good male role model to tell him that yelling at people and being rude is not okay. And one of the guys need male role models that they can look up to. And somebody needs to tell this kid, needs to start straightening that out. Okay, the other thing, I worked with skilled tradespeople. One was a guy, took me to the airport. We had a really interesting 2-hour conversation about how he was an angry teenager, all this anger, yucky stuff. Then he got into steel working, and he puts up high steel in buildings in Denver. Got really good self-esteem putting these frameworks up, things up there on the steel beams, and said the anger went away. But a lot of these guys need a good male role model. Okay, now what kind of art is he interested in? Let's look at that first. Where are his skills in school? Do you have any subjects he was good at in school? These are questions I always ask. And I'm trying to figure out what kind of job somebody might be good for. Did he have a good subjects in school, horrible subjects in school? What kind of art does he do? Is his art any good that he does? And then you start figuring out stuff he could do. And the other thing is rudeness. This is where a good male role model that he looks up to needs to say, this needs to stop. This behavior needs to stop.
As you've gained success professionally, Dr. Grandin, how have your coping skills had to change?
Well, the first thing I just had to learn that, you kind of do have to change. Now, everything, COVID's changed everything. All my travel's been canceled. I had one little tiny trip I was going to have on a private airplane. It was canceled. My host got COVID. So that's canceled. I haven't traveled since March. That's hard for everybody. I'll tell you one thing that helps. Get up in the morning, take a shower, get dressed for work by 8 o'clock. And I've been saying that ever since COVID started. And I just read a thing in the Business Week magazine, and one of the things I was reading just recently, it says the same thing. Get up, get dressed for work, and you're going to feel better. Now, that doesn't mean you have to put totally dressy clothes on, but this is what I would warn if I was doing meeting with you. My shoes are a wreck, but I don't have sweatpants on them. I just have a pair of pants not quite as good as what I normally would wear to the airport. No, but a lot of kids, the other big problem is kids are not learning work skills young. We need paper route substitutes. And COVID's now shut down all the churches because they were perfect places for 11-year-old kids, 10-year-old kids to do a little volunteer job. You put on your good clothes, you pass out the programs. When I was a child, what was done with all the children is when we were about 7, you dressed up in your good clothes and you served the snacks to the guests at parents' dinner party, and you took their coats and you were little caterers. That taught social skills. Now, we're very careful. I never, ever had to serve alcohol. Absolutely not. Just the snacks, take the coat, learn how to shake hands with them. It was Mr. and Mrs. You didn't use the first names. This was 50s. You see, this teaches important skills. Oh, here's someone saying drafting a wood shop taught me problem-solving skills. See, I think that's part of the problem today. And we need to be, and kids need to be doing chores. That's another thing that Tom has got up there. But all this rude behavior, I had to learn that I couldn't call colleagues stupid when we're on a project, even if he was stupid. I had to learn that. I had to learn a little diplomacy. And I had some good mentors. I had a good science teacher, but I had some good mentors out in the construction industry. I had a guy that seeked me out because he'd seen my drawings to design projects for him, and he mentored me on behavior at work. Panic attacks, I'll tell you right now, I'm taking antidepressant medication, and I write all about it in Thinking in Pictures, and I take a low dose of antidepressants. I've been on them since my early 30s. I've never stopped taking them. And the big mistake that's made with antidepressant medication for anxiety is too high a dose. Oftentimes the label doses are way too high. I've been taking a starter dose. And over again, I've had people, he did just great on a low dose. They doubled the dose of Prozac and it was horrible. Yeah, because then you're going to feel like you drank too much coffee and you can't sleep. That's the mistake that gets made. And even though this book is 25 years old, it's still accurate. And I did do some updates in 2006. But that, no, us visual thinkers tend to have a lot of problems with anxiety. And I've also in the construction industry worked with 3 other people that were on drugs and alcohol, and we got them off it with low dose Prozac. The VA, one guy was a veteran, and the others was a guy who owned a metal shop and people working in metal working. And then when they went off the meds, it was a gigantic mess. I'll tell you that right now. Same thing with people with bipolar. But they've got to have some choice of the meds and try different things and not just have stuff rammed down their throat and try the things that work. I do have to drink lots of water. That is a side effect of the drug. But my constant colitis attacks went away after I went on the antidepressants. I've been on them 40 years now. Don't dare stop taking them. And shouldered employment. This is where people get way too overgeneralized. All shouldered workshops are horrible. You ought to get rid of them. Well, I think there's some very, challenged clients where maybe shouldered workshops where they should be. And then there's others where definitely should not be there. You see this, but you see, I see them. I'm now seeing a shouldered workshop I went to. It was a very nice one. And there was some ladies that were putting ski brochures into envelopes for advertising. And they did it very, very slowly. There's no way I could pay them the regular wage. Yeah, they probably should be there. But then you might have somebody else that absolutely should not be there. There's been some problems where a restaurant got started that had people on the spectrum working at it. And then they got in trouble because they didn't have enough regular employees and they were accused of running a shouldered workshop. Well, that was stupid. They went in there and messed up something that actually was really good. No, I want people working at the level that they can work. And I'm seeing too many people in a shouldered workshop maybe shouldn't be there. But there's others, like the lady that was very slowly putting ski brochures in an envelope. See, and I see that, and it's specific. Yeah, it's the right place for her. And it's real work. She knows that that's real work. They know the difference between real work and busy work. You shut that down, and she doesn't have that. This is where people overgeneralize when they get on being activists for something, and they don't realize what they're going to do to stuff out in the field.
Dr. Grandin, there's another question in the chat box, and I also saw that you were voted one of the top 10 professors recently.
I was really happy about that. That was a total surprise. Somebody sent it to me in an email, and I'm going, oh, wow. And then I went and looked it up, and there was a variety of professors, a couple of math professors. I think it was a political science professor, and so whole different bunches of different kinds of professors. There was 10 of them. And I don't know, it was CEO World Magazine, and I'm really pleased that I got picked out in that.
Yeah, and kind of with your professor hat on, what reading would you recommend to students or professionals? Sandra noted that you mentioned a lot of things that you're reading, and she's wondering what you would recommend to students.
Well, the Autistic Brain's got a big employment session in the back half of it. That's where you can skip all the first part of it. We're about genetics. Skip that stuff. Read the part about the different kinds of thinking and the employment. That would be a good thing for you to read. I have a book called Different Not Less, which is now 16 people that were diagnosed later in life, all employed, all different kinds of fields from high level to low level, and successful in their employment. Now, where the diagnosis helped them was with their relationships, and they tell their own stories in their own words. And it's called Different Not Less. You might find that book useful. And then the Autistic Brain, especially the second half of it, is something that would be useful. And I agree with Tom there about the social component of the shouldered workshop. Yes, absolutely. And it gives the person worth. It's not so, you see, now I can think of some specific examples of where workers were exploited. There was a tremendous mess at a chicken processing plant where they had people with intellectual difficulties working in a chicken plant, which is fine, but they were housed in some completely disgusting place. So then the tendency is go in and just throw the whole thing away. No, the housing was absolutely unacceptable. They were being exploited. But one of the guys, they were doing one of the worst jobs in the line, hanging live chickens on the line, a really awful job. And he says, I trained the plant manager. When he first came, he was proud of that. He did, because the plant manager started out with the worst job in the plant.
Looks like we have a couple more questions. Kathy was wondering if you would share the name of your book again.
Okay, the autistic brain. This is the autistic brain, and I would especially recommend the second half of it where I talk about the different kinds of thinking and the different kinds of minds. The other book is Different, Not Less, and it's 16 older people that tell their stories of getting jobs, and they were diagnosed because their marriages and relationships were a total mess. And they're specific. See, my mind doesn't think in generalities. Okay, bullies, oh man. Only place I was not bullied in high school was where I had friends who shared interests. And even at work, finding friends through shared interests. You know, and if you, that's a really good thing. You know, and there's been, I remember a horrible case of bullying. I was in a meat plant I worked in back in the 80s, and there was a guy with intellectual challenges, and he helped package meat. He loved his job. He went out and bought every piece of equipment he could get to hang off his belt. And of course, people made fun of that. And they did nasty things to him, like pushing the side of beef into him. Things that were not nice. See, this is where management's just got to stop that. This is where management's just flat got to stop that kind of behavior.
And it looks like Rachel was wondering, what helped you to be able to stop saying everything you think? Like something is stupid or an idea is stupid, kind of like what you were talking about earlier.
I had people coaching me on that, and I took their advice. I think one of the reasons why some of the people in my generation have jobs is social skills were taught in a much more structured manner in my generation. And so that's why Granddaddy got that job and kept it. Because you were taught you can't just call people stupid. And, you know, that's something I had to learn. When I got invited to do my very first talk on cattle handling facilities for the American Society for Agricultural Engineers, 1974. And I got all these slides and I just criticized all this cattle handling equipment. And I showed my talk to an older engineer colleague, and he said, this is way too negative. You can't go in there and present it way too negative. And I took old Tom's advice. So I'd say, now here's something that's wrong. Here's the way to fix it. That's presenting. I used most of the same slides, but presenting it in a much more positive manner. And I took old Tom's advice. And then, you know, not to be just saying, well, that's stupid. You know, you have to be taught that. Now, you can see the way I think about that. I'm not thinking generalities. I'm giving you specific examples. Now, if I was doing your job, the way my mind would work would be, all right, now here's where this type of job really worked, was these clients. What do these clients have in common? Where the bagging of the groceries is a career. Okay, so right, severe intellectual disability. Yes, that'd be one of them. Where have been my most successful? Okay, wheelchair users, blind people. All right, here's one. I went to a disabilities conference, and a really articulate blind person explained to me how he was turned down from like 20 jobs. Now, I've worked on the corporate end of things. I know what HR is thinking. Oh, this is going to be too much trouble. The accommodations are going to be too hard. Well, you know how I would have prepared this blind person? I would have said, okay, you see the dog. Now you're afraid. I'm going to be too much trouble. Let's do a little thing. I'm going to give you a free trial for 2 weeks. There's only one thing you have to do is put this software on my computer. It's not going to trash your network. You have to do that. My friend will come in for an entire week to train me and my dog to the office layout. All you have to do is put that software on. I'll bring in my keyboard, my headphones. It's going to be really easy for the accommodations. Just try me. I'm going to bet you he would have gotten a job if that's the way he'd been prepared. But there's a guy I would have hired, and he was going for a call center jobs where he's totally qualified. And yeah, people see what I can see from what the HR person's thinking. Oh, this is just going to be too hard. No, you've got to explain to them that it's not going to be real hard. They just got to do one thing. They got to put that software on the computer. and then my friend will deal with everything else. And the only other thing I'd like to have, I don't have to have this, is a cube on the end of the row so that I don't walk over other people's junk. I don't have to have that, but it'd be nice to have that. But you see, as a visual thinker, as I talk about this, I see it. It's not abstract. And so I just see an office that I've seen somewhere else, and I'm now imagining this guy in that office. You know, just generic office cubes. How do you figure out what kind of a thinker a person is? All right, I start with what are the good and bad subjects at school? If the guy's flunking math, then he's not going to be the math thinker. Okay, then they gravitate over to the arts, or if they had skilled trades stuff at school, they're going to be good at that. The word thinkers love facts. Okay, we had the guy that was talking about the fantasy football, knowing all the players. That's the fact thinking mind. Yeah, that's the fact thinking mind. And I'm the object visualizer. I'm going to be good at a skilled trade or something involved with industrial design. Art was my best subject in elementary school. You know, kids that are visual thinkers, if they have access to art, they're usually doing it. Yep, that's how you figure out. And guys that are super good at math, we look at computer programming training. It's not all that hard to figure that out.
It looks like we have one more question. That'll probably be the last one we have time for, right, Kathy?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the last question, my 9-year-old was talking about her job this week at school is to teach others how to be a friend. I asked her what this is and to be nice to new students, and when others are not being a good friend, I remind them how. I jokingly said they need this job in high school. She said they don't have class jobs in high school. And then talks about how this mentality stops in middle school.
Well, I don't know. One of the things is we've gotten too much in the mentality, everybody's going to go to college. We don't have people that, like when the storms like trash the electrical wires, we need people to fix that stuff. And the thing is, these are essential jobs that are not going to go away. You know, COVID's not going to make them go away. There's always going to be a need for these jobs, and we don't do enough work training. Okay, let's just look at the simple things. Being on time. Okay, we got autistic kids now, they're fully verbal, going into college, and they lose their homework and they're not on time for class. By the time my science teacher got me convinced that I needed to study, I was never late for class. I did not lose my homework. Some of this, again, was 50s upbringing. They have problems now. I talked to a movie theater manager. This was way before COVID. He loved this autistic kid, but he was always half an hour late for work. I loved his knowledge of the movies, you know, to talk to clients, but you can't be half an hour late for work all the time. I didn't have this problem. And I think some of this gets back to some 50s upbringing. I was taught to be on time.
Sounds like some basic skills are still needed.
Well, that's just it. You've got to be on time, and you can't. Now I dress kind of eccentric. Okay, it's fine. If you want pink hair, fine. You know, you're going to have a hard time finding a salon open to keep it really nice. But you can't be a rude, filthy, dirty slob, and you've got to be on time.
And I think we're all working very hard to encourage good hygiene habits and professional behavior within the folks that we help. We do want to thank you so much today, Dr. Grandin, for coming and sharing your personal life as well as your professional accomplishments. You're certainly a really good role model in self-care and career advancement. So I do want to thank you for letting us know. I've been on a lot of Zoom conferences. I've had people, there was a lady in her underwear on a Zoom conference. I'm going, you've got to be kidding. That's recent. I didn't even know how to do Zoom conferences until COVID came along. Imagine that. Not sure what was going through her thought process that day.
No, but that's not appropriate.
It's not appropriate, but I've seen somebody go to the bathroom in the middle of a Zoom meeting, got up and went, and I think she forgot she was on the meeting. And so there you go. And it made the news. And it made
Oh,
the
how
news.
about the newscaster that was in his underpants? National newscaster, and he was in his underpants. Now, we have to excuse the children that interrupt and the pets that get in there. You know, people are at home. Pets and okay, a 3-year-old came into a national newscast and interrupted it. Okay, you are at home. Okay, that kind of stuff's going to happen. I don't care about the dog or the cat getting in there, but he shouldn't have been in his underpants. No, I've got, you know, only thing that I have on that's really crappy is the shoes.
Well, we really appreciate all of your sharing and all of your time. We will have a recording available. Would you like us to send you a copy of that?
Well, just get it out to everybody, which will be good.
We appreciate that. So thank you so much. Remember to send me an email if you'd like CEU
Okay, all righty.
for today's presentation, and
Oh,
congratulations.
here's somebody that's interested in helping people make YouTube videos. You see, this is another thing is people don't ask for help. Okay, when I had to put all my classes online, I mean, I asked for tech help. And then we have some other professors, and their classes are kind of a mess. And I think part of the problem is too proud to ask for tech help. Believe you me, I asked for tech help. I said, help? No, there's a lot of tech help around. When I did my very first project shown in the movie, I didn't know how to do the concrete reinforcement. I got on that phone and I asked for help to get the drawings for how to do the concrete reinforcement. No, there's certain situations where you got to ask for help. Okay, you got a kid that is flunking the math. I was flunking the math class in college. I asked for help right away when I failed the first quiz. I didn't wait. I asked for help. When I was in graduate school, I failed the first statistics quiz. I got a graduate student to tutor me. I asked for help. It's a big mistake is people don't ask for help quickly enough. Then I talked to the parents where there's no resources in the neighborhood. And I said, well, who do you know that owns a shop? Let's just look at what's here in the neighborhood. Some friend at church that might, know somebody where you could work. You know, people are not resourceful enough on finding resources that are right there in their neighborhood that they hadn't even thought of.
Well, I think we're done with questions today.
Okay, all right.
Is there anything you'd like to wrap up with today, Dr.
No, I
Grandin?
think that's just it. And I hope I kind of got you thinking about things in a different way and thinking more specific. Here's specific examples of things that work. Then I group them into categories. Here's specific examples of things that don't work. I put those in categories. We're not going to do those again. That's kind of the way I look at it.
And I think we can all appreciate your guidance on avoiding vague direction and being more specific, and to individualize the job search and training based on a person's intellect and aptitude and interest.
Well, the other thing is working memory thing is really, really common. So the pilot's checklist, any task that involves a sequence, encourage them to make a pilot's checklist. And if the employer says, well, pilots have to use a checklist. The other thing that's interesting about checklists for pilots is they chunk it. I looked up the checklist for the Dreamliner plane, and you don't throw a 100-item checklist on a pilot. It's chunked, like pre-taxi, then pre-takeoff. And there's like 5 or 7 things in each chunk that they do. Then when they get up to the 10,000 feet, there's another checklist. It's chunked. And they're not, otherwise they go, there's some things that aviation has learned. And so there's a lot of people with working memory issues where making pilots checklists, that's an easy thing to do. And all you need is keyword. You need a keyword like you'd put into Google to trigger the next step. Like a pilot's checklist might just say flaps. Then he knows he's got to set the flaps. Just says flaps, that's all it says. It's a keyword. You can actually look them up from small airplanes and big airplanes, because working memory problems, with a lot of people with learning differences are going to have that. And then you've got the people that got the you know, reading problem where they see the print jiggle. Try some pale colored paper. It sometimes works.
Well, thank you so much.
Okay, well, it was great to be here. And I got to go answer some phone calls. My phone's been vibrating in my pocket, and I got to go see what it's got for messages.
Thank you
Well,
again.
Thank you for all the nice comments. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the nice comments.
And we thank you. And I'll be in touch with you.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right.
Have a nice day. And thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you so much for having me. Okay, I'm going to leave the meeting. Okay, bye.
Bye.